Hello Year 9 and any students of pre-World War II history. It is Mr. C here and I'm in sunny Munich to discuss the Munich Agreement. Now the name Munich and the word Munich is often associated with appeasement, this policy of Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, to appease Adolf Hitler. And indeed he made an agreement here at a meeting in Munich which was one of the significant causes of the Second World War. Let's go and have a look. By the summer of 1938, Europe was in a parlous difficult state. Adolf Hitler had unified Germany and Austria in the Anschluss. He had taken the Saarland, he had remilitarized the Rhineland, and he had his eyes set on a part of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland. Now, the Sudetenland was part of Czechoslovakia. It had ethnically German people living there, and Hitler, with his policy of Lebensraum, living space, wanted to consume those German-speaking people into the wider Germany, the Third Reich. So he was putting a lot of pressure onto Czechoslovakia, surrounding the borders with their tanks, threatening to invade. Britain and France were allies with Czechoslovakia, and the Czechs, led by a man called Edvard Benez, said, "Could you come and help us?" But Britain and France were slightly reluctant. They knew they couldn't face the Nazi threat. Their army was simply not strong enough. So they decided on a policy known as appeasement, to appease Adolf Hitler. Offer him, say, yes, we'll give him that as long as you don't do this in the future. We'll give you Czechoslovakia, but don't invade anywhere else afterwards. So they decided by September of 1938 to arrange a meeting here in Munich near this Glyptotek area to decide the future of Czechoslovakia. And that meeting took place here on the 29th and the 30th of September 1938 between the Führer, the Chancellor of Germany, Adolf Hitler, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, Daladier of France, Benito Mussolini of Italy, and a few other dignitaries, but most importantly not representatives of Czechoslovakia. They were not invited. And just in the room, just where about my finger is here in the corner office there of Adolf Hitler, the Munich Agreement was signed. Now this agreement said that Germany could take the Sudetenland. They were allowed to have that region of Czechoslovakia where many ethnic Germans lived, but was part of Czechoslovakia. The French and the British said, okay, Germany, you are allowed to keep this on the promise that you don't go and invade and ask for anywhere else. Hitler agreed and they signed this document. Just out on the steps there, they stood out and agreed to the terms. The problem is, of course, can you trust Hitler at his word? Well, no, you couldn't. And of course, about 6 or 7 months later, he took all of Czechoslovakia. And of course, 1 year later, September 1939, he invaded Poland and broke the promise to Neville Chamberlain. But the actual agreement took place in the office just behind me. Can we very quickly spare a thought for poor old Edvard Benez, the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia, because essentially he saw his country sold away from him without him being consulted. He was not invited to the meeting between Chamberlain, Mussolini and the French Prime Minister Daladier and Hitler, and where the Sudetenland and his country's fate was decided. He was simply not invited, and he was told what to do. And he would have felt very aggrieved. Obviously, he's losing half his country in the main industrial part, but he would have felt particularly aggrieved because he had an alliance with Britain and with France, and they essentially had sold him down the river. Interestingly, during the Second World War, obviously, as we know, Hitler invades all of Czechoslovakia eventually. During the Second World War, he moved here to Gwendolen Avenue in Putney, to a rather nice house where there is a blue plaque, and you can still see there today, where he lived in exile. He returned to Czechoslovakia after the war to be Prime Minister again, but sadly died not long after the Second World War. But we should spare a thought for poor old Edvard Benez. Perhaps he didn't deserve what he got. Well, I've gone from the vibrant streets of Munich to an industrial estate just in Hounslow by Heathrow Airport. Why have I come here? Well, this was the site of the original Heston Aerodrome, and there is indeed a hangar that's still left, remnants of it, and a slight sort of period style terminal building here. The rest, unfortunately, is just modern industrial workspace. But this was the location. At the end, after the Munich Agreement had been signed, Neville Chamberlain flew back to London and he landed here. And a very, very famous photograph and famous speech, just probably over here, probably a little bit further on, which has been built on now in Heston Aerodrome, where he said, "I have secured peace for our time. I have got a deal from Adolf Hitler. He says he'll stop at Czechoslovakia. We've agreed that he'll take Sudetenland, and that will be that." Please note, he said peace for our time. He didn't say peace in our time. He's often misquoted there, but there we go. Of course, as I've just explained, this was all rubbish, really. Within a year, Hitler had invaded Poland and World War II had begun. Neville Chamberlain, well, his policy of appeasement had ultimately failed. I think maybe we could have a little bit of sympathy for him. Britain was not ready to fight a war at all. Its military was not ready. He perhaps felt that Hitler wasn't ready to, or wasn't going to go too far, and he would stop there. And I think he also knew that Britain had just fought the First World War 20 years before, didn't want to carry on with another policy of war. So you got to have a little bit of sympathy. But he didn't survive the failure of appeasement. Churchill came in by May of 1940, and also within a few months after that, Chamberlain himself had died, and he never saw the end of the Second World War. But I think this is quite a good place to end after starting in the lovely vistas of Marienplatz, here now in this sort of forgotten part of Hounslow, because Munich and Munich Agreement is a very interesting thing that often comes up in modern day history and politics as well. It's associated with this idea of what do you do with a maniacal dictator, or when you are presented with the idea of war. Do you fight, or do you try and find peace? And we are living in a situation now of a rampant Vladimir Putin in the Ukraine and other dictators swirling around the world. Do we stand up and fight them, or do we try and make a deal and potentially join them? And please tell me, let me know what you think. But that ultimately was the Munich Agreement. And come along here to Heston Aerodrome, the remnants of, to see where Neville Chamberlain was.